I will call to order the Tarrant County Election Commission.
I will call to order the Tarrant County Elections Board.
And from my perspective, I will confirm with Hyder that he accepted the notice of the commission meeting via email.
I did.
Okay, the first order of business on the commission will be the approval of the minutes, and I believe that the correction needs to be made to that. September 25th, 2018 elections.
The correction that needs to be made, it says that the Republican Party Chair, Tim O'Hare, and that should be Darrell's name there instead of
Okay.
Tim's. That's the only
election
correction.
board minutes.
Okay,
So Natalie, also go down and look. It says that I wasn't there, but I made a motion.
On which one, the election commission?
Am I looking at the wrong one? Yeah.
Did I not fix something? How did I check?
where's that?
If you look in the first paragraph,
The
it
election
says,
board,
am I looking at the
yeah,
wrong?
I see that. Okay,
Okay,
so
it
that's
says-
on the election board minutes.
Yeah,
It'll need a
election board, and it
correction.
says Tarrant County Democratic Party Chair Deborah Peoples was not present, but a quorum was present.
Right.
But then when you go down, I made the motion.
Right, I just
And
didn't
second by
correct that.
you, Judge, that we make Hyder responsible for procuring.
I'll make that correction. I'll
Okay.
go back and see who made that
Okay.
motion first.
Okay,
That's on the board meeting minutes.
okay.
Can you do that quickly while we're, so that we can do that? So we're on the commission, Tarrant County Election Commission minutes.
Do we have the same? I think, so hold on.
There's two sets.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah, two sets. Yeah.
Darrell and I both had two of the same.
No, I've got
Okay.
commission and board,
Do you? Okay, all right.
elections board and elections commission. Elections commission.
Yeah, they, okay.
Similar.
Suggestion of the Board of Commission. I guess we did.
Okay, so right now, we are on the Tarrant County Elections Commission packet. We have called to order. We're now looking at the minutes of September 25th meeting. And on that is where,
Bless you.
thank you, where we need to change on the third line, party chair, we need to change that from Tim O'Hare to Darrell Easton. And I believe that everything else in those minutes are correct. No, you're looking at the board.
I'm looking at the board. Okay.
I'm looking at
So
the commission.
on that one, do I have a motion to approve as amended the Tarrant County Elections Commission minutes?
I will make a motion to approve the Tarrant County Election Commission minutes from,
And do I have a second?
Second.
I'm looking to make sure that we got the right people making the motions for this one.
Thank you.
All in favor, and on this motion, the sheriff and Hyder, y'all cannot vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the minutes are approved, and I believe that is the only thing that we have to vote on in the commission, so we'll stay in session, but we've finished that part of the deal. And now, Hyder, it's your place to go forward with the approval of your minutes.
Right, so for the Elections Board, in front of you, you have the minutes of the meeting of September 25th, 2018. We're looking to have those minutes approved.
Except that we know we have to change who the motion was made by.
Yes.
And she should be back in a minute, so we will
Hold this one up.
potentially wait on that one.
Do we know who made that?
That's what we're trying to figure out. We're not real sure. But we should know that shortly, and I'm just gonna bet that it may have been, no, I'm not gonna bet, because I don't know. There wouldn't have been another lady on that particular deal, so I don't know who it was gonna end up being. So at this point in time, let's move forward and let's get an update on the, let's get an update on the November 6th, 2018 general elections.
Okay, good afternoon. Let's try this. Okay, better. All right, good afternoon. I'm going to be putting on my elections administrator hat now, not chair of the elections board. So we have an agenda that consists mostly of updates to the Elections Commission on different projects that have concluded or that are coming up. So we're going to run through this presentation. As usual, my intent is to go through it and take questions, but feel free to stop me at any point if we need to. So the first item on the agenda is the update regarding the November 2018 election. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. It was a high turnout election compared to past midterms. In fact, we just went to the statewide conference for elections officials, and it was one of the things that was commented how this was, for some scholars, something they're looking at. Wow, Texas really had a high turnout for different reasons. But almost 56% turnout. How were those ballots cast? It's another interesting fact that is different from what we had seen in the past. Almost 70% of the ballots were cast on early voting. A lot of turnout in those days. And of course, because the volume was so high and the number of absentees didn't grow that proportionally, you also see that what would have in the past been 9-10% was almost down to 6%. What happened with those absentee ballots, almost 80, or a little over 82% of everything that was mailed out came back and was counted. Less than 1% was rejected, and there's just a little under 17% that never made its way back. When we talk about why they were rejected, it's a little difficult to see there, but I'll tell you, the biggest number, the 152, was non-matching signatures, and the 121 was ballots that came in after the deadline. Those are the two biggest reasons for ballots that the ballot board did not include in the count. We're talking about 200 ballots out of 600,000. So statistically, I think clearly doesn't affect the result at all, but nevertheless, it's something we're going to be looking at with the ballot board to see if there's anything we can do to help compare those signatures.
You said out of 200 ballots, out of 600,000, how many were?
Oh, yeah, out of the total, I'm talking about the general result of the election. I was 5.8% of the 600,000, so we're talking 30-something thousand ballots that came back.
The 43, the 17, and the 9, what were those? Do you know? Right off.
The legend's down there, but I can't see it. Do I have a mouse here? Yeah, it does. Okay, let me click here. Does that work?
You're not going to get there from here, I'll bet.
Did you say
Can
150?
you go back to
No,
the page
I
before
can't.
and see if we can see the legend?
There we go. That should do it.
That almost did it. It did it very, very well.
Okay.
So
There we
no
go.
witness, there you go.
No signature.
9 that didn't have a signature, the witness did not match, did not sign it. The other category is a group of minor items we have there. If I recall well, I have to get the breakdown
That's
for
all
you.
right. I mean, we're only talking about 43, so.
So that's what
Okay.
happened with the mail ballots, the absentee ballots. Service times, I know there was a little talk about this. If it's not that legible on the left, but basically the timeline goes from September 21st all the way down to November 6th. The red line is for ballots that were requested on that day, the one that took the longest to get out of the building. And the brown line is the average. So if you look at around, let me see if I can point here. This middle of the screen, that's 7 days, which is required by law. This line is one ballot that for some reason took 9 days to get out. For some reason, basically means we didn't process it in those 7 days. But in average, they were all, every day they were going out about 3-4 days is what it took between the moment we got a form from someone, an application, to get out. The first line is kind of misleading because a lot of the applications are annuals. So if somebody requested an annual in March, the way the system records it and kicks it out when we press the generate everything we have to mail out the first day, kind of skews the data a little bit. So that those first line, the 2 lines, the red and the brown, are a little misleading there on the service time.
So, Hyder, is it only then the 8th and the 17th of October? Okay.
Yeah.
That
Around,
we,
yeah,
okay.
we have a couple of cases of ballots that took more than the 7 days to get out. That's why I wanted to have the red line as the max, because I didn't want to come in and say, on average, we take 3 days, but there are a couple of cases we have to look at and figure out why those forms were placed in the wrong tray or exactly what happened with that application. So what's outstanding from that election, although it's passed, everybody's been sworn and everything, we still have some work to finish. We're doing what we call the lessons learned process. We get all the team together and say, what did we do right, whether by accident or by intent, and let's make sure we keep doing it. What we do wrong, let's make sure we address it and fix it. So our staff came up with a list of everybody and their own little part of the process says, I think that if next time I do the copy before I do the typing, I can get better at this. And with that list all together, we came up with 27 action items. Some of these have been already implemented. I have my staff here. They've been really working hard at making sure that we can incorporate these changes by May and work on them right away. Report cards, which are an example of a past lesson learned, is a new document we tried in September in which we are going to reach out to the judges and tell them, this is, thank you for helping us out, the whole thing. Here's the things that we detected that you need a review for next time. So you let someone turn in a provisional without signing an envelope, or you opened a polling place after 7, or you had an incident and didn't call us in 30 minutes. We have all those notes, precinct by precinct, station by station. We're putting them all in a database to generate individual, personalized letters telling them, take a look at this next time you want to help us as a judge. We feel that this is something we can put on the table and share with the parties, of course, because we train them, we don't appoint them. Unlike lead clerks in early voting, we can make decisions when we have to. In the case of judges and clerks, we do our best, and we'll be sharing that with the parties to make sure that you know what's happening out there and you have those notes. So they're about to go out. It's been a lot of work to go over those, almost 1,900 names and lists and records and get them one by one into something where we could automate the task.
Will Darla and I be able to get a copy of that? Would you send
Sure.
us? Yeah.
That's part of the conversation that
Okay.
we would love for you to have it so you can
Okay.
see, for everyone how we're doing. And we're going to find a way to standardize this so that in the future it's kind of a knowledge base of, the history of people who help us with it.
Is there any thought been given to going ahead and before you send that out to everybody, that you send it to the 2 party chairs, let them look over it and see if they have any general comments about that? And I mean, it may be that something that you're about to send out a letter to somebody and they've got more details. You may ultimately
Right.
send it out anyway, but I'm just saying that before we send out something, it's getting another set of eyes on, okay, here's a problem, and they may be familiar with the problem and may have.
Absolutely. If we feel that's positive thing contribution,
I
absolutely.
I believe I would do that or consider doing that.
Okay, we'll do that. And then, obviously, it was the first time we used the new electronic poll books. That's what EPB is. Those iPads where people were signing to check in electronically before they voted. We have a lot of information we took from them that'll help us analyze how people behave at the polls. So some of it was public and people liked it. We had that live dashboard that people were looking into to see how count was going, especially on early voting. People would look at it every day and say, this is what's going on. These are the places that have more voters by hour, by day. It helped us do things like anticipating, this was yesterday at this time, 11 a.m., and so we switched to today, and, it's looking busier, so let's prep for this. So that kind of information, we have a lot of statistics now that will tell us what were the fastest locations, why is this happening? Is it because in TCC South Campus the poll worker wasn't as confident, or is it because a lot of people check in with out-of-state driver's licenses and that takes longer because you have to do a couple more operations on the screen? It's looking at that data to say, how do we make this better? And if we can't make it better, how do we prep for high volumes, which is what happened this time around. It's given us interesting answers. Almost 97%, if you look at the screen, 97% of people who voted showed a Texas driver's license. as the ID. The first five, top five used were exactly the type A IDs the state has for the voter ID law. So, I had a call during early voting. Voter said, I went with my friend to vote, and they weren't asking for ID. I said, sure. He said, I went to vote. I said, okay, where did you vote? So I looked him up. You haven't voted, sir. He says, well, I didn't vote. I went with my friend. Okay, let's look up your friend. So he went to this location, found him. Around what time did you go? And I told him, here's what I'm saying. The 10 people before your friend and the 10 people after and the 20 people in the same time range, they all had swiped IDs, because the poll book tells us that if it's not swiped, scanned. If it scanned a barcode or if it was a manual search. So, you might have not noticed, but they were definitely showing IDs because they were scanned. They weren't manually input. And I said, okay, that's great to know. I didn't know you had that information. That was the end of the conversation. So it's given us a lot of tools to respond to that kind of comments from the public, and we're really happy with it.
The comment was, is the person before or after him or his friend were not asked to show an ID?
Everybody in that time range actually
But everybody did.
had a scanned, which means it wasn't like I walked up and said, my name is Glenn Whitley. I had a document that was scanned and automatically said, this is me, right? So
Okay.
there was ID shown, is I
Yeah.
guess the conclusion there. So that's part of what we're continuing to do, look at those, and we'll talk about it in a couple of items, trying to use that information also to be smart in choosing locations and sizing locations, and looking for 2020 when we will not have straight party voting. So voters who would take a minute to vote in this election are going to start taking 4, 5, 6 minutes, because I saw that. I stood in an early voting location, and you could just tell this person probably voted straight party because they would walk right in and out in a minute, and you would have someone stay at the booth 5 minutes. And that's important for us to make sure that we address early enough. So that's November. Most relevant issues, of course, long lines. We got calls, especially in early voting. Looking back on it now, 70% of a high turnout election voted on early voting. On early voting, you have 48, 49, because we opened additional permanent locations. On election day, we had 338. So we're talking less than 20% of what you have on election day. So again, let's look at the data and see, is this county growing at a pace in which that's no longer enough and we need more early voting locations or bigger size locations? Problem with putting more equipment into the same location is you need a bigger room. You need, a lot of space, and I'm not sure how many of those locations can fit more machines in there. So this is a conversation we're going to start having in terms of sizing for 2020. The time for receiving absentee ballots. Again, we're looking at the process. We've made some changes in how we handle applications from the moment they come in till the ballot goes out. One of the things that we looked at in retrospect was the application came in, it was indexed, it was scanned, it was entered, and then finally the ballot was processed. And so we're reaching out to the vendor of the VR system to have it done the other way. The moment we put our hands on it, we enter the data and the ballot's ready to go out, and then our internal process of imaging, indexing, and getting ready to receive it happens while that ballot is traveling. We're also working with the post office. Ballots should take 3 days to get to someone. They're taking 7 to 10 days. And in the statewide conference, we noticed that Dallas County, Collin County, counties around us are saying the same thing. Ballots are taking 7 days in some cases, a lot of cases to get to people. So that's something we need to address with them. And then I listed training issues because this is the approach we can take to try to contribute to this. We got a lot of complaints of the poll worker did not offer me a limited ballot. The poll worker was confused filling out a provisional, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things I noticed, and I think we have talked about this in the past, is I want to work on transforming the training. Right now we have 2, possibly 3 classes per poll worker. You come in for equipment training, you come in for forms training, and now you come in for electronic poll book training. And so the way I see it, that means that 6 a.m. when you get to the polling station, you're trying to figure out what to do, and you have to remember the first 10 minutes of this class, and the first 10 minutes of that class, and the first 10 minutes of this class, and put it all together. So we're working on restructuring the training and have a single all-in-one class. You're going to come in, Chapter 1, 6 a.m., how to set up the polling place, the poll book, the forms, the machines. chapter 2, what to do at 7 a.m., open this, click on, I mean, so it's not put it together, it's walk through it. We had a working session with members of the two parties last week, because you train your own poll workers and you do a lot. So what feedback do you have? What do you think we can incorporate in this to make it better? That's our side. Like I said, we want to share the report cards with the parties to make sure that what goes beyond training is also considered on the other end. That's November. What was it? 3-minute summary of it. Yes, sir.
Well, I was just, on the mail-in ballot, since I've worked the election ballot board before, on the first day, you're reviewing signatures and you find a mismatch, you know, so you put it in questionable status or it gets rejected. Well, that voter would have plenty of time to come in and correct the error if they knew their ballot was kicked out. And I've read in some states, they notify the voter right away that the ballot has got a deficiency and that they could correct it. The same thing for statement of residencies. They don't show it, send that back. I mean, you can notify the voter if we had a procedure to do that, and that way more voters will be able to correct any errors. I mean, most of them are elderly voters anyway, and they're gonna make errors. And is there a way? Now, when I was setting for this last election, I went and looked, and you have them in PR status, and then they go to OK status, but if they go in questionable status or reject, they're no longer showing on the list of voters. And therefore, you know, I could not go in and say, okay, my neighbor across the street voted by mail, and it's got rejected, you know. If it doesn't show up if it showed up one day and it's not the next day, then I would know, but it seems like that status could be shown as rejected, and they would have time to correct it. Now, I know closer you get to election day, it makes tighter and tighter. So I don't know, you know, if they get their ballot in early, they seem like they could correct their ballot and have it counted.
And definitely, I mean, it's like taxes. It's important, but everybody seems to wait to tax day to pay it, so we have a high volume in the end. But one thing that we've been working on is considering how do we try to get people towards the beginning of the process where they have time to address these concerns, and we don't have the last-minute wave. And we're considering things like pulling a list of voters who requested a ballot last year, an annual, and send them an email. If you think you're going to get a ballot automatically for May, you're not, because that expired. Here's a link. Here's a form. Do it early. So instead of waiting for them to realize 2 weeks before the election, where's my ballot? Why haven't I got one? We're telling them it's not going to come unless you apply again, and try to get them towards the early stages of.
Yeah, but along the lines of what Darrell was saying, right now, if the ballot board rejects a ballot, notification to the voter does not occur until after the elections are over.
Correct.
So can we legally do that at the moment that they reject that ballot?
Pretty sure we can't. I'll double check that and get that answer for you. Cannot. Those are, they have to go out after the election.
So we'd have to go to legislature and try to get a correction.
Pretty sure the answer is that one.
And then the other issue I have, this was in the primaries, of course, last year. We won't have it for the municipal elections this year, but when we have the primaries and the city elections and then the runoffs, you know, we rejected, probably 150, 200 ballots because they had the city in with the, you know, the primary and then the primary in with the city, and then they had the runoff in with the city, and you know, and it really is confusing to a lot of these elderly voters that they can't stick 2 ballots in one of the carrier envelopes and then have them counted. And you talked about having different color ballots for each race. Is that something that you think we'll do in the
That's
future?
not something we followed up with the state on, and we definitely need to follow up with and see if we can, how much we can change the ballot
And
design
again,
to
the
make it
state
obvious.
tried to encourage the cities to move to the odd years and get away from the primaries. And some of them, in some counties, I know the cities have done that.
Yeah, they have.
We haven't. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and it is confusing, but short of the color, and even probably with the color.
Yeah, we were brainstorming ideas back then. What if you had different colors, you know, a blue envelope with a blue header ballot and a red envelope and a pink you know. So they would know, you know, you got to put the green envelope, the green ballot on the green envelope,
Yeah.
the pink ballot in the pink envelope, and so on.
They're gonna
And they would
say
realize
stamp.
it's not the
Yeah,
same,
that's
it's
what I was trying to
different.
say.
They're
They're
gonna
trying to
say
save the
stamps, and they're
stamp,
gonna put it
and
all
they
in the
don't
same
see
envelope.
why they can't put both of them in the same envelope.
Yeah.
Hader, do you have their email address if you're saying you wanna?
Some people, some voters have email addresses
But
on their
right now,
files. Not
until
enough.
the state changes the law, we can't do anything. I think it has to be, I think you have to wait until after the election is over before you send out, because right now, I think we're sending out those rejection letters, what, about a week or 2 weeks after the election is over?
But see, I think you're referring to the
referring to the,
preemptive, your application for an annual has expired and us trying to tell people this document expired.
Okay.
Some emails, we don't have the majority, but again, if we start and people get them more. A lot of people don't like to give their email thinking, you know, I don't want to get,
Well, then
bombarded
I just
with
worry
a ton-
about people that claim they don't have an email, and you're reaching out to, you know, certain
Some
sectors
of them,
people
and,
that have emails, and then there's another sector that doesn't have access to that technology. Now what?
let's look at the cost, let's see how many they are, and is it a little postcard, is it a letter, or, I'm just thinking, what's the cost also of the overtime and the last minute rush on ballots and everything versus the cost of telling them, apply again, and we'll get it to you, you know, an E minus 45 when we start mailing them.
I'm gonna say this, even though I probably wish I hadn't as soon as I do. There's been a lot of questions about mail-in ballots. There's a lot of swirling going on around those mail-in ballots. If not for the disabled who cannot get out and for the military who are not potentially here, I'd do away with them. And because they're, you know, they are very susceptible to the fraud. But it is what it is. The legislature will have to make that decision as to what they're going to do, and all we can do. But I'm not sure we should be going out of our way to and spending a lot more time to try to encourage folks to use the mail-in ballot.
Yeah, the intent, again, it's,
Yeah, but Judge, I think you have to look at the percentage of people who actually do mail-in ballots who vote perfectly right. I mean, how many did we have, you know, the number of people here that are questionable?
We had
So-
30,000, and you're right, there's probably only about 300 that got it wrong.
Yeah, so I just think
But
we
that
have to
doesn't
weigh
mean-
that, against, you know, when you have seniors, you have to weigh that about, is it really a convenience for them, or, you know, are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
and again, it's not encouraging someone who hasn't done it and reaching out to people and say, you know, you can do this. It's people who are using the service and saying, there is a renewal process that you may not be aware of, just know it. You know, it's like when you get that letter from DPS saying, hey, you have to, if you're going to use your car, renew your license plate, and here's the information you need to do it. Now, it's up to you to do it still.
We're sending letters back out to these there's 150 people that got letters
Yes.
saying your ballot didn't count.
Didn't
because
count,
your
correct.
signature didn't match up.
Correct.
I'd be curious, are y'all getting calls saying, I didn't send you a ballot? Anything like that?
I think I have one letter on my desk that came in last week
Says that wasn't my
saying, I'm
ballot.
surprised by this, so we have to get to it and respond to the person, look at it. But
They're
that letter
surprised
comes,
that you didn't accept the ballot, or they're surprised that you had a ballot from them?
no, that the signature didn't match. So this person was saying that is my signature. But that's a question for the ballot board. I mean, again, we don't make that decision.
Sure.
So have to make sure we respond in the right terms to that person.
I guess the other issue I'd like to bring up again was the husband and wife that signs each other's ballot.
Yes, sir.
Normally, if we receive both of them, we've been saying, okay, we can match the signature on this envelope with that application and so forth. Is that technically legal by the election?
I understand it's common practice. It's not
common
questioned
practice.
by the SOS. I mean, they know that's. And we had, and I'll give you another case. We had a lady who showed up to vote in early voting, and the electronic poll book said, you already voted. She called us, checked the record, and it said H. Garcia voted. And it turns out that H. Garcia has a daughter who's also H. Garcia, and the poll worker apparently checked her in. So we looked at the daughter's record, the signature seemed to match, the whole thing seemed to be an error from the poll worker. So we called the state, said, hey, you know, can the poll worker undo this? Can they roll back? They said, if they're convinced that it was an honest mistake, yes, you can roll back because we don't want to disenfranchise the voters. So that's usually the kind of response we get. If there is enough documentation to make a solid decision that won't disenfranchise someone, you have the authority to do it. In this case, it's the ballot board.
And I would just, having looked at this a year or so ago, I would just tell you that there's a lot of things that technically we're not doing exactly the way the Secretary of State suggests that it be done. And that's because, and that's the case in your major urban counties.
Yep.
You've served on the election board, you know that it literally can't be done and us accomplish what we've got to accomplish in the time that we have to accomplish it. So the law needs to be changed, and you know, it is what it is.
So, November?
How about May?
Okay. Well, no, May, the further down you get on the presentation, the less elaborate the post-its are. There's very little right now about May. Right now, what we do know is that we have 54 entities that have said, I may be in, but what we've known in the past is that by the last week before the deadline, that number drops significantly. But it looks like it's going to be a pretty spread out around the county election anyway, just like last May. But what I do know, what I can tell you is that some of the things we talked about, we're going to start piloting on May. We have already ordered more electronic poll books. We should be able to cover the county on election day. And while future elections, large elections like November or the next November 2020, we would still have to get some more, at least we can start getting a reading behavior on the polling places like we did on early voting today, back in November, like we have today. So that's going to be a huge piece of information for us to look at in planning for November. How do people behave at the polls? How quick they check in? How many units we need, et cetera, et cetera. So we're really excited about that. We should be trialing already the all-in-one training I talked about. We have booked a room in Resource Connection for the entire month of April. So the approach is to do small hands-on classes instead of massive, 500 people in a room for 3 hours. It's little groups, hands-on, touch the equipment, fill out the forms throughout the month. We don't want to do more than a month because too far ahead, people forget. But
what was the general feedback from y'all's folks with regards to the poll books?
I only had one complaint that I know of that said this isn't working right, but I think everybody else.
It was working when they actually got out and looked at it and everything was fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So overall, I think the electronic poll book worked pretty good.
So on the all-in-one training, you're gonna do it a whole month, you said April, so then workers will be able to go in and pick their dates? Okay, 'cause
we're
now
working on
we
that
do
to
the
figure out how the
3 days.
schedule. I
Yeah.
mean, I would expect the weekends to have the higher demand, but
Okay.
we only have one room right now, so we're looking at it to figure it out.
Okay. So how many people can be in that one room?
We asked for a room that would fit 40 people, but
Okay.
it's probably 20 plus the bulk equipment and a lot of things. So
Okay.
we have to go see the room. It's a room that is being finished in that building. It should be ready in time because the other ones always have recurrent meetings. Like every Thursday, this department meets in this room. So we didn't want to find rooms where we would have to go in every 2 days and disassemble 20 kits, remove them, assemble them again. That would kind of defeat the purpose. So we were able to find that one and say we want it the whole month. It's ours. We keep the key. We leave the equipment in there. Come in 6 a.m. If you have to do an early class, everything's ready to go. So now we're going to start working on the schedule.
So I want to go on record as saying I love that because now everybody doesn't show up for equipment training and they go crazy when they get there and they don't know about the equipment. And so this way, I like the all-in-one because people will have to put their hands on the equipment and learn.
And there's one thing that's going to change, and that's in one of the upcoming sections of the presentation. We're going to have new equipment. So a lot of I've been doing this for 20 years. I know the equipment has to go away. And so we need to start prepping for how do we run the 2,000 poll workers through training? Because they will have to, whether they want to or not. With the change of equipment, the whole thing changes again.
Where are you looking at doing this?
Resource Connection.
Has there been any consideration given to doing it at the sub-courthouses around the county?
For the future, I mean, I would love it if we could do it so it's closer to everybody. but I need 4 crews that can train. I want to make sure the program works and that we get it right and that we then go out and do it focalized in every corner of the county and probably even in our office, but yeah. And that would also mean that we wouldn't have to do it in a month, but the last week, but I need more people at every location.
Well, what I was thinking is that put it in the sub courthouses, leave it there the whole month, rotate your crews
Okay,
to where, okay, this Thursday it's gonna be at Southeast or wherever. And I don't know whether the county commissioners or whether you've got the space in all of them, but I think most of them have rooms that they might be able to give you for a full month. And then you could just leave equipment there and be able to do it that way and not have to move your equipment. Now, if you check with the commissioners, they may tell you there ain't no way that's gonna work.
right. We definitely have thought about bringing it closer to people. We know that one location is
And I'm
always
not
going to be inconvenient for
suggesting
someone.
do it all over the county on the same days or anything like that. I'm just suggesting that it be, you just train in different places and give them an opportunity
Right.
to come. Now, what'll happen there is they'll think it was at this place and it'll be at another place. But, I'm just suggesting that you consider that because I think some people don't want to have to travel very far, and that would be a good way to do that.
Yeah, and that was brought up by my staff, and I said, let's do one thing at a time. Let's do it first. Let's make sure it works, and then it's going to be easier for us to understand what it means for us to move from one place to another. We'll also have new equipment, so we'll have to figure out then how easier or how much more complicated logistics are going to get with that.
I like also using the same team of trainers, because if you start using different trainers in different places, somebody may emphasize something and something else, even though you tell them. And so I think as you roll it out, I like that. Whether you move it or not, I think it needs to be the same training team.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not really suggesting that we add to the teams. I'm just
Yeah.
suggesting that you move the team.
Right, they move around the same team.
And not have to move equipment, because we should have enough equipment that you could set it up at we've got probably 8, I guess, is sub courthouses.
Right, but if you want to train 20 people and you pair them up or do groups of 4, we're talking about 5 sets of equipment and 8 places. Now we're talking about 40, 50 machines. So it starts building up a little bit. Not that it's the end of the world. We'll pull it
Okay.
back at the
Just
end, and that'll be the spares
consider
for
it.
election day, but we're looking at that, I
Okay.
guess. And then the other thing, some of those changes in the absentee ballot processes, enter first, image later. We're even looking at whether it starts to make sense at this point with the volume of applications we're getting to outsource the initial batch of ballot printing. So, especially for November, you have 40,000 people who throughout the year put in an annual request. So September 21st, get them out. Or 25, 30,000, whatever was in there at the time. And what happens is that my staff starts on day 1 dedicating themselves to print and stuff and shipping. And we have a ton of temporary staff in the office and a lot of muscle put into that process. And that's where, whoever was the last one from those 30,000 says, well, mine went out 7, 8 days after the day you started printing. Big print shops, you give them that file and it'll go out the next day. So we know ahead of time. We know who they are. We just, now we have to build a case to, I guess, convince county administration to count, hey, we're spending the same thing on temps that we would, or are we even spending anymore if we do it that way? So that's some of the things that we're considering, and how do we make that process more expedited? Because that's where we got the biggest number of complaints on November, I believe. That's May. The next item is an update on purchasing of new voting machines. The goal is to complete it by May this year.
What
Not to
happened
be,
to the update on election department from election administrator?
I switched those 2, I think.
Okay,
Yeah, that's at the end.
okay.
Do you want me to
No,
go? Okay.
go ahead.
So the purchasing of equipment, the goal is to be completed by May this year, not to be confused, to be used in May this year. May 2019 and any possible runoff are going to be the last elections of the equipment we currently own. But at that time, we should be officializing a contract in Commissioner's Court with a new vendor. So what's the timeline we have? This Friday, we're in target to release the RFP, Friday, January 25th. that gives February for the whole process that it takes to have the pre-bid conference and submit proposals. So we should, on the last week of February, those first days of March, have the evaluation team score the written proposals we get. And then the following week, see the demonstrations from the vendors come in with the equipment, show us. If we stay on track, mid-March, we've completed the scores, and that pretty much tells us who we go with. The purchasing methodology is scoring and going with the highest score. The only thing that's different about this contract from the contracts that the county will usually enter into is that Commissioner's Court cannot approve the contract without state approval. The state basically looks at it and says, yes, you're buying equipment that you can use for elections, go ahead and sign it. So that month between the complete scores and the Commissioner's Court approval is that process of negotiating the contract, getting the draft ready, sending it to state, have it approved, and then come back so we can sign it.
Have you worked with purchasing on this timeline?
Yes.
So they are good with these?
They're good with it.
Week after
They've
week
been,
of
I mean,
specs?
we did like a draft and they adjusted, but yeah, we're all in the same boat here with this.
And I guess it's just a short group of vendors anyway, so.
And we're going there. We're going to use it for the first time in November. If it all works, we got it May. And there's 3 vendors that can sell us equipment. We've seen them. I did it alphabetically, but on the right is the incumbent Hart. They're the ones that sold us the equipment we have now. And in the state of Texas, you basically have half and half. Hart and ES&S is the other vendor that's certified. And then there's Dominion. Dominion has a long story. They acquired Premier, which used to serve some counties. They haven't certified equipment, but I saw them in New Orleans in August in the Election Center Conference, and they said, we're certifying, we're coming in to apply for the bid. So it's good. We'll have a 3-vendor competitive process, hopefully. It's up to them to be ready in time with certification issues.
The court has indicated at this point in time that the preference is a machine that you'll put all your selections in. It will print out a ballot. You will review that to determine that it's cast the vote that you intended for it to cast. You'll walk the ballot over to a machine. You will put the ballot in the machine, and that will be the casting of the vote. That should prevent there from being a hanging chad or a failure to color the box just the way the machine wants you to color it. And it will also preclude somebody from getting a ballot and saying, okay, this is the way I wanted to vote, and walking out with it. Because if they walk out with it, it will not have been cast. And it is illegal to walk out with a ballot showing the way or an image of a ballot to show how you voted.
Right.
So that's at least what as a court, we have indicated that would be our preference in the purchase of the machine.
Are you there?
Mhm.
Who is on your purchasing? Who's on your RFP team?
We asked for 12 copies. IT said that because this is disconnected from IT infrastructure, they were not really looking to get involved in depth in the evaluation, but at least witness the demos and provide feedback. So it looks like it's basically my staff at this point, an elections department evaluation.
And if the intent of the Commissioner's Court is for this scanning process of the final paper ballot, would those scans be available for review later if there's a question?
Yes, they will be in the machine. They'll be stored in the machine. And unlike the system that we've currently got, any of our early voting, we have no physical evidence of how that vote was cast.
And in recounts, you always go to the paper trail. You could look at the images, but eventually you just go to the paper trail, and that's the beauty of it. And the RFP says explicitly we are looking for a hybrid, so any offer that is not for something like that will immediately be non-compliant.
So we would have a paper backup for every ballot.
For every ballot.
And like I said, we would still have, we would, as much as possible, walk away from hand-marked ballots, but for absentees, we still need them, because we mail them home, and they don't have a DRE to print it.
Judge, we don't have any interest in putting members on.
We have not, I don't know for sure that you've come to us with who will be a part of that team for the evaluation process. What were your thoughts about not having somebody from other areas, whether it be the problem with it being the party chairs
No, I'm not looking at that.
is that would create a quorum of the election board. We couldn't do that. We could have someone from administration, we could have somebody else as a part of that process. What are y'all's, do you have a feeling, I see you grinning.
Yeah, Mary Louise just hurt our feelings. She said, I don't want them.
I'm not,
Well, and that's the thing, we
Yeah,
couldn't
no,
have y'all.
Yeah, I know.
But
The
we
more-
might,
yeah.
what was your feeling for making it just folks in the elections
Yeah.
department?
I love it. I mean, we are the subject matter experts. We know what we're looking for. The way the RFP is written is not written to ask the vendors if they can do the job. They have to go through federal certification and Texas SOS certification. We know all three are probably come up with something that can do the job. I want my staff to look at it and say what fits best what we have, our processes, our infrastructure, our other systems. Which one is going to be less prone to error? Just because sometimes with these systems, what happens is that just because you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's like, yeah, it'll do the job. You can open a hole with a hammer, but it's not for that. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to find a tool that best fits and improves our process. And
I
so,
think I share what Mary Louise is saying to some extent is that that's great, but when it really comes down to running the elections and operating those machines, your staff really doesn't do a whole lot of that. I mean, that's all done by the party volunteers or the people who you're paying to do that. And it might, if we're gonna not include them on the evaluation team, I would at least like for there to be opportunities for those folks to come and to play with the equipment
correct.
and
Give their feedback.
as to how that works and, what they might or might not like about each one of the three, if there ends up being three. And at least that way, those folks who are going to be hands-on when it comes to the elections would have had some input into the deal. And that way,
I think that's a good idea.
everybody could come up and be a part of that.
Yeah. And
And I think we had actually talked about when they bring in the machines for demos, I'd like to see them be kept here for more than just a day. Maybe we keep them here for, 2 or 3 days, and we put out an invitation that any of the prior judges or anybody who would like can come up and see
the only
the
thing I would
discussions.
caution is, again, not the prettiest tool is the one that may do the better job. People are going to look at it from some perspective that is a part of the whole process that, we see the whole process and we can see value in other areas that the general public may not perceive. And so I would just caution with that. I'm all open for it. I would love them to come in and be witnesses of the demo and provide feedback.
And that's all we're asking, but one other thing I'll state is you better be careful how you write that RFP, because if you don't write it the right way, there's only gonna be one determination as to what causes us to buy a machine.
Amen.
And that's gonna be price.
Yeah.
So if you want it to be anything else, you better figure out and get with purchasing and make sure that it's a weighted deal and that it allows some consideration for something other than price.
I think we've had that discussion. I think we've reached a point where we're comfortable that that document balances, financial considerations with actual value per every dollar offered. So that's what the pointing score is about. We score vendors. The final result is a number from 1 to 1,000. 600 of those points come from the functional and technical evaluation and 300 from the score. And that's been the standard on the
Where's the other 100 come from?
references from the vendors.
So 600 function, 300 price, 100 references.
Correct.
GK, you look like you're just dying to say something.
No, except the fact that purchasing needs to be involved in the evaluation also, because at the end of the day, only purchasing can make the recommendations to the Commissioner's Court.
Right.
And again, if it is a weighted average type thing, does the Commissioner's Court have any choice but to go with whatever that recommendation is?
Well, what will happen is that since it's an RFP and not a bid, so the way that the equipment will be evaluated, the vendor will be evaluated, I'm assuming that there's going to be probably 3 or 4 different areas where they're going to. And
it's gonna be.
consider
Yes, sir.
bringing them in for recommendation, or for at least their comments and
And,
feedback.
and as a precaution, I don't know if it's done before, but we asked for 12 copies of the proposal per vendor, just because we knew that this discussion may happen, and we may say, oh, well, we need more copies, so we have enough material if we want to add people to the committee. That discussion can happen now.
So is all your management gonna be involved in the, scoring?
Correct.
In each department, you have, I guess, a supervisor or manager?
And specialists in certain areas. So we want to even bring in the supervisor that is in charge of the logistics and loading the trucks to tell us, okay, how do you see this? How do you see stacking these in the warehouse and putting them in trucks and unloading and unloading them and passing them on to poll workers? And what's been your feedback? And you have to set up 3 locations a day of early voting. How does that look with this equipment, with that, and the other? So the idea is to have those expert eyes on every part of the process to say, okay, and this section of it, comparing A to B, here's what I see. Plus the management team.
Okay.
So, March the score, May the formal document, we should be fine. Citizens Advisory Committee, there's a small date. We just got together for the first time last week, the 16th. I got to say it was a very constructive, cordial meeting. I think everybody understands that this has a potential to be something good. I didn't perceive any, I don't like this. I didn't perceive any, I'm all in already, but I think everybody who was appointed to help us find a way to make vote centers something feasible for Tarrant County saw the potential in it. So since we got together for the first time that day, we finally found a schedule, the first Thursday of every month. I need to have a discussion with county administration on whether we can use this room or the other one, if we want to have the meetings recorded and have a public meeting, or if we're going to be also the DAs okay with minutes of the meeting. The reason I'm having that debate on whether it should be one way or the other is that those meetings are a lot of work, looking at maps and making suggestions and discussing. They're not easy to follow like this one, where I'm presenting and I'm taking questions. So we'll get together with DA and figure out, if we want to keep having them in our office and publish meetings of what we discussed, or if we want to have them in a room where we can record the meeting and post a video. The goal we have is to be ready around July. If we want to be able to apply for November, to have vote centers in Tarrant County in November, we expect the state to say that you have to apply somewhere in August, which would be bringing it to court.
Currently, would we have to go to the legislature and get permission for Tarrant County to do a vote center?
To the Secretary of State, not the legislature. So the law says you can, but only a limited number of counties per year can do it. And I think it's 5 counties over 500,000 voters, and 5 big and 5 small ones. I know that, I'm not going to name it because I don't know if they've said it publicly, but in the meetings we had, one big county, Harris County, has also said that they intend to participate. So we'll see how many people get on board early in the year and how many are waiting for November. Eventually, what could happen is that by the time we're ready and convinced, if we are, and the court says, let's do it, we might turn around and the state might say, nope, I'm already filled up with the maximums this year. However, there is, I think, a piece of legislation that's filed saying, let's get rid of that limit and let's let counties apply when they're ready. So that could change between now and September.
And again, just to emphasize this and to make sure that I understand this, if we go to the vote centers, regardless of whether we go to the vote centers, we will in no way will the machines that count the ballots, in no way will their results be submitted to some central location via the internet.
No.
The only thing that we will have that is quote unquote accessible by the internet is our polling books.
Correct.
But nowhere, no how, no time will the machines that have our ballots inside them, or the machines that are counting the ballots that are put in there, at no time will they be accessible by the internet.
Correct. like early voting nowadays. You need the electronic poll books online, so if you vote in one location, you can't turn around and vote in another. But there is what is called an air gap. There's not a wire between those devices and the ones that count. They're completely disconnected. So, and that's one of the things to look at when we buy the equipment, and that's usually one of the places for issues is how do you make sure that when you checked in and you were supposed to be given ballot A, you're given ballot A and not B, but this computer, who knows it, can't talk to the voting machine where you actually vote. So what process reduces that error? That's the sort of thing that we'll be looking at in the new equipment.
So I want to, let's talk about the meetings that he's having. We all selected people to be on this committee.
Correct.
What are we doing past that to make sure the community at large, because I have my committee member, but, you know, she's going to have a limited, you know, universe that she can communicate to. So, Judge, are we going to, is it something we want to put in a, you know, to give to the Star Telegram to say, hey, how do we get it to chambers? How do we give everybody a chance? If you're having 15 meetings, what can we do proactively to let some of the nonprofits and other people in different communities saying, I would have loved to have sat in on that public meeting, especially if you're limited to, you know, we're in the weeds, because voting centers are they're very important, and they're going to draw good and bad. She may have a representative that loves it, but then, you know, in her and Darrell's party, they're going to come out and say, I can't believe y'all didn't tell us about it. What are we doing past us really just giving you those names saying, hey, start having meetings with 15 people?
The first step we did was get together and figure out how we were going to work and what we had to produce. And so as a committee, we don't have the authority to choose locations. That's important to and we talked about it. That is ultimately the court. We, as the elections
And
office,
I think she's talking about how are we going to educate everybody that we're, go ahead.
Right. And the reason I'm saying this is because there was a bit of an expectation of, okay, we're in here to look at the map and drop the places and come up with a finalist. And
Yeah, your little 39 example really cooked our.
While it may be, you know, something that we could add to the mix, that's not really the final product. We have to come up with a methodology in selecting locations. And so right now we're at the stage of what information has to be put in there to create a solid document that will say when locations are chosen in vote center mode, you have to look at this, and based on that, make a decision. We also decided to try to break down analysis by sections of the county. So we literally split it up in 9, like a bingo board, 9 sections. What I'm thinking is that as we tackle those sections to look and say, is this criteria that we're developing working? Does that make sense?
Okay.
We then have your members reach out to people in those sections of the county, those communities, and say, we're going to talk about the part where you live.
Got it.
Do you want to show up?
But I think even further than that, aren't we required, I think she's referring to how are we going to educate the people that we're even looking at vote centers.
Process.
And I think that's where we're required to have some town hall meetings.
Once we choose to go to vote centers, the outreach to tell people what vote centers are and what the changes are, not that we're going into it. So if the court were to say,
It was my
I like this.
understanding that in order before we could make a decision to go into vote centers, that we had to hold town hall meetings in order for the people to understand what we were proposing.
no, we have to have one public session, public comment session in court before the court can finally recommend. And we have to submit to the state with a documentation, a plan for outreach for the population to explain the change. So basically, you don't want people showing up at their old polling place and saying, nobody told me.
My thought would be, and my understanding was, and I'll listen to what everybody else has to say also, but I would ask that your Citizens Advisory Committee look at holding town hall meetings throughout the county, maybe certainly at a minimum, at least one in every commissioner's precinct.
Okay.
Where you talk about the whole theory and concept behind vote center, moving to the vote center concept.
Okay.
So that it's not a matter of we vote and then the next day people wake up and say,
What happened?
what in the hell, what were you thinking? Why didn't you at least consult with us? Now, we've already, I know we've talked about it to some extent at some of the Republican Party events, but I think that there really needs to be an overall, some town hall meetings and some things within the press,
Yeah, just press
Inviting
releases.
to-
And just saying, it's, we're in the middle of this and we're doing it, Hader. I know what you're saying, and I understand it's really in the weeds, and I respect that, but I just think we will be better served if the Star Telegram or other media doesn't come to us and say, well, y'all been doing this since January, and now it's May, and it's better to
Right.
kind of get that message out. I know
Okay.
you don't want to bring a bunch, but I just think we'll be better served personally.
So
For-
your staff, sorry, Beth, they're gonna throw things at me, but I like the bingo board analogy. I think if you did town hall meetings in all 9 of those quadrants, then you come back and you have that second meeting, you've done it twice. And so people can't complain, because if you say, I thought about the commissioners, those are big, and somebody's gonna say, I didn't get the notice, I missed it. So I know it's putting extra
Okay.
work on you, but if we did them in the 9 quadrants, I think you have a better chance at reaching people. And that's just my 2 cents.
We'll definitely put in the schedule.
Yeah.
I didn't mention this in the May part. We had an entities meeting this morning. It was a traditional thing to have all the city secretaries and everybody come in, say, hey, here's what's coming up for May, here's a draft of the contract, et cetera, et cetera. But I used the meeting to say, these are things that are happening, and that your people who live in your subdivisions or your cities or areas are going to ask you about. So we talked about the voting equipment, and we talked about vote centers. So they all said, most of them explicitly, no one opposed it. Contact us if you need help. We're in the communities, we can reach out. We're going to discuss it with our boards or governing agencies and come back and say, hey, here's our feedback. So I think that's another channel we can use with them and say, hey, do you want to invite the people in your city? Let them know that we're going to be here this day, et
I think
cetera.
you could do it through a couple of things. I think the town hall meetings, much to what you said there, maybe have a speakers bureau where you had 3 or 4 people who could go if requested. You might have neighborhood associations.
Yep.
You might have a lot of different organizations that would be interested in having a speaker to come out and discuss this. So if you had a speakers bureau, I think that would be a plus.
Okay.
It could do that, and then try to get that word out to that. We can get the word out. You can get the word out to the city secretaries. You want to have this decision made by May.
July.
July.
Be ready to start scheduling the public comment session. I mean, it depends again on the schedule the state publishes for. This is your deadline to apply for November, but I would expect that to be in August. So July puts us in that spot where we have time to set up the paperwork and be ready.
I think it's a great idea.
I think with your contacts with the city secretaries, most of those entities have newsletters that go out to the local
Exactly.
citizens, and all of those interested parties would look to those, webpage, Facebook, and that way we can push it out to make sure that individuals can't say, I haven't ever heard about it. Those are opportunities with a group that you have close contact with that you just met with today, so that'd be a good group to put it out to.
And we have other resources through county administration. I know the PIO uses a lot of targeted announcements through social media, Nextdoor, that kind of thing. So, when we're going to hit that town hall, maybe tapping into some of those resources and say, can we hit it and things
So
like
if
that.
our representatives that we gave names to and she says, Hader, I'm gonna bring 5 people to the meeting, are they allowed to bring?
They're public meetings, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I have people who just call and ask, and
Can I show up?
we're gonna have to create a page in our section of the website and say, here's a citizens advisory committee
That's perfect.
record. Here are the calendars and here are the minutes, and people are gonna show up little by little.
And the more we can publicize it, the better we are.
Any other comments or questions about that one? Next.
The last item, the general office items, very little, lots of little things, but the big ones, this morning I sent out the letter of offer to the assistant elections administrator person who made the offer to. He verbally accepted it, so should be on board soon. Reach out to most of the ones that we interviewed in person who, were not chosen and wanted to have that
Very nice.
attention to them to say, I wanted you to hear from me. So that person will be joining in April 15. Know how much, I don't know how the HR protocol right now, because this is a public meeting, how much I want to talk about on the record, but we're ready for that one. Joining in soon.
Talk about it.
Yeah. And then, as we go through, it's been almost a year since I started, so queuing up ideas and big things to look at. One idea that's been in my head since the first one in March is this RFID inventory system. I'm working with IT on looking at that idea. Basically, instead of when we get a truck and we unload it, we have groups of people who have to spend hours there scanning one by one every little barcode on every piece. And so what I told my staff was, you drive down I-35, 65 miles an hour, and go through the express lane, and you get charged for that. So there's got to be a way we can do something like that with the equipment where you just push it into warehouse and you say, yep, it's all in. We're done. We don't have to spend hours tracking things. And then, the idea is just go from there. When you load them in the truck, if you have a reader, did you miss anything? You don't have to wait until we get here and it's 2 a.m. and we realize something was left in the school, and now we got to figure out who to wake up to go get it. So that's one little project that we're looking into with IT. Has the potential to be something big, and I love to volunteer to be the guinea pig for things like that. A new voter registration system. We're going to have census in 2020. 2021 is a year of redistricting. Redistricting is a very annoying task. That's the only word that can be used. With the current infrastructure, if we have upgraded systems where you can use maps and, have you ever used, I don't know if I can name specific brands here, but Zillow, when you say I want to live in this area, you just draw a map and it says, well, then these are the listings you're looking for. That kind of thing. Where's the new district line? It's right here, so everybody gets automatically moved. That would make our lives so much easier, and it would prevent so many errors. And there is technology, so we're looking at that.
No politics involved in any of that, so don't worry about it.
It's the process. It's the year. It's every 10 years we have to face that. So no matter what, we're given the maps. No matter what's drawn, we have to adjust the precinct lines. And so,
Well, if it was just that easy, I just would strongly suggest, if you think it's that easy, get your armor on before you get up and make that statement.
we don't draw them. We just input them in the system, right? So whatever we're given, just the task of putting that data in the system and proofing it right now is unbelievably extensive and demanding.
And really, we can't even do that until the redistricting is done by all bodies concerned. You have to wait till the feds, you have to wait till the
Correct.
state, you have to wait till the cities,
Right.
you have to wait till the counties.
But whenever that happens, that's when we come in and say, geez.
So sometime in the spring of '22, we might hope to have it done.
Now, the good news for that, that might be something we can look into using state funds, Chapter 19 funds. So depending on how much it costs and how much we have available, we may be able to do something nice there without any impact to the county finances.
In all sincerity, they would need to have all that done and hopefully not be in the courts by sometime in
Right.
sometime before the filing deadline, which is going to be the first week of December 2021.
But again, whenever it's finally completed, what we get is, this is the new map, put it in your system, right? And what I don't want to face is a potential problem of, an entire neighborhood got left out of an area because you didn't click on the right thing and you didn't see that the maps were overlapping differently or something like that. Okay. And the county has great GIS infrastructure. Most of those maps are defined, so if we can find technology that says, read this and match it, again, our lives, half the job, we still do the proofing, but you don't do the inputting, and that's what we're trying to look at. And then, with the new equipment, the new change, we're going to need a lot more space. We're looking at, is there a way to optimize space inside the building we have? I think it's the way the desks are laid out and a lot of things, we could compact a lot more of the space we have there, optimize the layout, but that's going to take some serious evaluation by probably some architect or something to see whether I ask the court for money to remodel or money to buy a new building. Did I say that or did I think about it?
Well, you said it out loud right
Out
there. But they
Yeah, no, we're going to have a space.
Your staff recognized the fact that we needed a picture because as soon as you said a new building, my eyes went wide open.
There's going to be a space issue at some point. And again, we're, correct me if I'm wrong here, 5th fastest growing county in the nation?
Probably.
So more people, more votes, more machines, more envelopes, more public records, more staff to help, it's just the nature of it.
we're also the
I don't
most
wanna wait until-
conservative
I know.
and the lowest tax rate among the
I
five
know,
big
I know.
counties around here.
So that's why option one is remodel and squeeze more in the same building.
Right. Going back to all that and the updating is one of the questions I had written down there. Data-wise, can you tell, because this is gonna have an impact in regards to no more, straight party voting. Did that happen in more than one sector, or was it more in one place or another? And, because if people are going down that ballot, it's just gonna delay everything as we vote.
I wouldn't be able to tell, well, I may do a breakdown per precinct. Let me go back on that. But no, what I did was basically, as I was out looking at, sometimes I just go out and say, I'm gonna go visit an early voting location. So I get to know some places and I just see things. And it was evident at some points, like, why, I think the first time I noticed it was like, wow, that person's been there for a while. And then I started spotting and thinking, that might be it. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Obviously, I wasn't going to approach anybody and ask, hey, did you just vote for?
Let me watch what
But I think it was pretty obvious that the only thing, some voters are
Have
very
you checked
educated on
with-
their ballot and some aren't, but
Have you checked with other states where they have eliminated straight party to see if they have statistics on the,
No.
the length?
no. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to get timing from the logs from the voting machines, but we couldn't get that. This equipment we have doesn't have it to say how long is the average time at the machine. As I know from the poll books, it takes you 30 seconds to check in, scan your license, confirm, sign, move on. But then the time it takes from when you start voting to when you say, I'm done, walk away, the blue flag's on the screen, I don't have that. And we certainly didn't want to create any uncomfortable scenarios of someone with a stopwatch and, documenting things at a polling place. So it was kind of a visual. It's like, that was about a minute. That was about 5, okay. I think that's it.
I think those of us standing outside of the polling locations begging for every single vote, could tell you how long it took, and watching the lines wrap around in entire buildings.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when that happens, it's voter frustration, and we want them to be happy that they are doing their diligence, as a citizen in our state and our nation, and I see it as an honor to be able to do that, and the frustration level on the last day was maximum.
It was.
Because it was almost all the way around an entire building.
It was. Election day was rough, especially in that last hour. And I think it gets more tense because, it's now or never. And definitely the
The
stakes
last
are
day
higher
of
there.
early voting even.
Oh,
But only
okay.
25% turnout on election day versus early voting.
Right.
Yeah. And we had 300 locations, and still we had locations that.
See, this next election, we're doing away with straight party, but at the same time, we're gonna have the central voting in all likelihood. And so as a result of that, I don't know whether it's gonna compound the problem or whether it is going to lessen the problem because they can go anywhere to vote. So it's gonna be, I am, two things. I am anxiously looking toward the 2020 election, and I'm damn glad I'm not in it.
That is a challenge. I mean, we know that we can try to build patterns around what happens on early voting and understand it. I mean, to assume that the Arlington sub-courthouse is going to be a low turnout location would be very foolish. Mm-hmm. Early voting, it's always very, highly visited every single day of it. So it tells you those kinds of hubs, if we can identify them, those are the ones where we have to have more equipment. And hopefully if we can do the poll books online, election day, the whole thing, we'll be able to provide tools like what's the wait line in this location and that location. That'll help people. I'd rather drive an extra 10 minutes here where there's a 20-minute wait than just walk here and wait for an hour in line. So hopefully we'll be able to get some of that too in time for 2020 as well.
Okay, is that it for?
That's it for me if you have no
Okay,
questions.
now you can stay there. No, you can't. You need to come back up here because you have a couple of items that you've got to get approval of. I can ask, are there anybody wishing to make public comments to the Election Commission? There appearing to be none. The Election Commission is adjourned. And we're now back to the election board. apparently I made the motion. I must have had a high voice that day. And so it's up to you to take over now.
So going back to the election board meeting, going to item 2, the approval of the September 25th, 2018 meeting minutes with the correction made on the third item. Motion was made by Judge Glenn Whately.
No, it's on the board. Election board.
The election board.
The election board, the correction was on the motion.
The third item,
Okay,
right?
you don't, but there's, I gave you, I redid it, so.
The third item, right?
Yeah, so it's now correct.
It's now correct, so
Correct.
there are no corrections.
Right, that's what I'm saying, that the motion now says made by Judge Glenn Whately.
And I'll move to approve the minutes of the election board for September the 25th.
And I'll second.
Okay. And the minutes are approved.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Third item on the agenda is the approval of the elections administrator, Javier Garcia, is responsible for procurement of election supplies for the May 4th, 2019 election per 51003 of the Elections Code.
I will move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. I am there approved for procuring the supplies. Do we have any questions and comments from the members of the board or from the public? Then I believe we can adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what she just handed us.
So that's what you raised.
No,